FBI and ICE have launched a large-scale federal operation in Washington, D.C., targeting a transnational crime network believed to be operated through shell NGOs and humanitarian organizations, seizing 8 tons of narcotics and freezing $940 million in assets.
This morning, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Immigration and Customs Enforcement held an unprecedented emergency briefing that sent shockwaves through the highest corridors of power in the nation's capital. At 2:38 a.m. Eastern Time, over 1,000 federal agents executed coordinated raids across Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, dismantling what investigators are calling the most sophisticated transnational crime network ever discovered, operating under the cover of diplomatic immunity and humanitarian organizations on American soil. 8 tons of narcotics intercepted, $940 million in assets frozen, and a man known only as the Supreme Liaison, a figure so deeply embedded into the international diplomatic community that he attended United Nations briefings while simultaneously commanding a global smuggling empire that stretched from the Horn of Africa to the heart of the American power structure. This is not a story about street crime or gang violence. This is about a man who turned NGOs, charities, and diplomatic credentials into weapons. And if you think corruption looks like criminals in dark alleys, you're not looking at the right places, because what federal investigators uncovered wasn't just a drug operation. It was a shadow government built on human trafficking, narcotics smuggling, and the systematic exploitation of every loophole in international law designed to protect humanitarian work. Stay with me, because what comes next will change how you see power, diplomacy, and corruption in America. 2:38 a.m., Embassy Row, Washington, D.C. The streets are silent, except for the whisper of wind through the bare trees lining Massachusetts Avenue and the distant hum of security detail vehicles patrolling the perimeter of foreign embassies. Fog rolls thick across the monuments, swallowing the marble facades and diplomatic flags in a gray shroud. But beneath that fog, in the pre-dawn darkness, something is moving. FBI tactical teams, ICE enforcement squads, DEA strike units, U.S. Marshals, DHS special agents, SWAT units in full combat gear, night vision engaged, moving like shadows through diplomatic corridors and secured buildings. They are converging on 11 locations simultaneously. The first target, a 5-story office building in DuPont Circle, home to the Somali Global Relief Foundation, a registered non-profit organization that claimed to facilitate humanitarian aid, refugee resettlement, and international development projects across East Africa and the Middle East. But what the FBI discovered through 3 years of covert surveillance was something entirely different. The second target, a luxury condominium complex in Arlington, Virginia, where the Supreme Liaison maintained what diplomats called a private residence, and what federal investigators now know was a command center for transnational crime. The third target, a network of warehouses across Prince George's County, Maryland, disguised as logistics companies handling food aid, medical supplies, and disaster relief equipment. The fourth, residential properties across Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York City, modest homes in immigrant neighborhoods that federal agents now know were used as stash houses, human trafficking transit points, and migrant smuggling coordination hubs. At exactly 2:38 a.m., the operation begins. Flashbangs shatter the silence. Reinforced doors explode inward under hydraulic rams. Agents in black tactical gear flood through marble lobbies and concrete loading bays, weapons raised, voices cutting through the chaos. Federal agents, hands in the air. Get down now. Inside the Somali Global Relief Foundation headquarters, the scene is disorienting. The building looks like a legitimate humanitarian organization. Professional signage, glass conference rooms with maps of refugee camps and development projects on the walls, framed photos of smiling children, water wells, and school construction sites. In a secure room on the 4th floor, behind a door that requires biometric access and encrypted keycard clearance, agents find something that shatters the illusion completely. Industrial shelving stacked with vacuum-sealed packages, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl. High-grade narcotics in quantities so massive that the lead agent on scene later described it as enough to supply the entire East Coast for months. 2.5 tons of narcotics in one location alone, labeled as medical supplies, packaged in boxes stamped with Red Cross symbols and UN Relief Agency logos. At the warehouses in Prince George's County, the raid unfolds like a scene from a military invasion. SWAT teams breach from multiple angles simultaneously, cutting off escape routes as suspects scrambled toward loading docks clutching duffel bags stuffed with cash, passports, and encrypted communication devices. Some make it to the parking lot, most don't make it past the doorframe. Inside, agents discover a full-scale smuggling operation hidden beneath pallets of rice, medical equipment, and crates labeled as disaster relief supplies, complete with modified shipping containers, false bottom crates, and mislabeled cargo manifests designed to disguise narcotics shipments as legitimate humanitarian aid. The drugs are packaged in bags labeled as grain, powdered milk, and pharmaceutical supplies. They are indistinguishable from real aid materials until tested, and they are deadly. In the stash houses across the East Coast, agents find something even more disturbing. Rooms with reinforced locks, surveillance cameras, and terrified individuals who are being held in conditions that can only be described as modern slavery. Human trafficking victims, men, women, and children promised safe passage to America, then trapped in debt bondage and forced labor by the very organizations that claim to be helping them. ICE agents work quickly to secure the victims, wrapping them in emergency blankets and speaking in low, calm voices as they guide them toward waiting transport vehicles. But it's what agents find in a locked office inside the Arlington condominium that changes everything. A wall safe hidden behind a sliding panel, containing diplomatic credentials from 3 different countries, encrypted laptops, handwritten ledgers in Somali, Arabic, and English, and a series of financial documents stamped with official seals from banks in Dubai, Nairobi, London, Geneva, and the Cayman Islands. One agent powers on a laptop still logged into an active encrypted session. On the screen, a network diagram, hundreds of nodes, shell NGOs, ghost nonprofits, offshore accounts, encrypted communication channels, financial routes spanning 5 continents, and at the center of it all, one identity. A man who called himself the Supreme Liaison, a figure who presented himself to the world as a respected humanitarian coordinator, international development consultant, and diplomatic power broker, who attended high-level briefings at the State Department and the United Nations, who sat on advisory boards for refugee resettlement and international aid, but who, according to the data now in federal hands, was the operational commander of the Somali Global Syndicate, a transnational crime network that funneled narcotics, weapons, and human beings from East Africa, the Middle East, and Central America into the heart of the United States through a web of fake charities, sham NGOs, and corrupted diplomatic channels. An agent looks up from the screen and speaks into his radio. "We need cyber forensics now. This network is global." 5:50 a.m., FBI Cyber Operations Center, Washington, D.C. A secure operations room buried deep inside the J. Edgar Hoover building. Walls covered in digital displays showing maps, financial flow charts, and intercepted communications in a dozen languages. Forensic analysts sit in rows, fingers moving across keyboards as they crack encryption layers one by one, peeling back the digital facade of the Somali Global Syndicate. What they find is staggering. The network has a code name, Operation Sanctuary Shield. It is not a traditional drug cartel. It is a fully integrated transnational crime empire designed to exploit every vulnerability in international humanitarian law, diplomatic immunity protocols, and refugee resettlement systems. Shell NGOs registered in Delaware, New York, and Virginia funnel money through fake aid organizations, sham charities, and ghost foundations, claiming to support education, healthcare, and economic development in war-torn regions. Offshore accounts in Dubai, Nairobi, Istanbul, Geneva, London, and the Cayman Islands disguise the transfer of hundreds of millions of dollars in proceeds from drug trafficking, human smuggling, and arms dealing. Logistics companies with legitimate UN and State Department contracts use modified cargo containers to move narcotics and weapons hidden inside shipments of food aid, medical supplies, water purification equipment, and disaster relief materials. And at the top of the pyramid sits the Supreme Liaison, whose digital signature appears on encrypted authorization codes linked to every major shipment, every financial transfer, every recruitment of corrupt officials and compromised aid workers. The analysts trace the money backward. They find payments to U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers who looked the other way during cargo inspections at ports in Baltimore, Newark, and Norfolk. They find payments to State Department contractors who expedited visa approvals for individuals with ties to the Somali global syndicate. They find payments to low-level UN staff members who provided advance schedules of aid shipments and refugee resettlement flights. And they find something even more chilling. The Supreme Liaison didn't just run a smuggling network. He built a parallel humanitarian system. He registered legitimate NGOs with the IRS and State Department. He secured grants from international development agencies. He attended briefings with federal officials and diplomats, all while using those same credentials, those same organizations, to move narcotics, weapons, and human beings across borders with near-total impunity. One senior FBI investigator puts it bluntly during an internal briefing. This is not corruption. This is command-level collusion. He didn't infiltrate the system. He weaponized it. The room falls silent because everyone in that room understands what they are looking at. This is not negligence. This is engineered treason, and the operation has just begun. 4:55 a.m., Joint Federal Task Force Command Center, Quantico, Virginia. A massive digital map dominates the wall, glowing red with over 90 pulsing markers spread across Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, and stretching down the East Coast toward Florida. Each marker represents a location tied to Operation Sanctuary Shield, drug stash houses, money laundering fronts, human trafficking transit points, Shell NGO offices, corrupt officials on syndicate payroll. The operation commander, a senior FBI official we'll call Deputy Director Catherine Holloway, stands before the map, her voice steady and cold. We have one objective: total eradication, no safe havens, no diplomatic cover. We dismantle this network completely, or we don't stop until we do. Over 1,300 federal agents are mobilized, FBI tactical units, ICE enforcement squads, DEA strike teams, U.S. Marshals, DHS intelligence officers, state police from Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, SWAT units from 12 jurisdictions. Black Hawk helicopters lift off from staging areas, rotors thundering as they bank toward target zones across the metropolitan corridor. Armored vehicles roll through empty streets, carrying breach teams and forensic specialists. And at key airports and seaports along the East Coast, federal agents coordinate with Coast Guard and Customs to intercept smuggling convoys attempting to flee before the net closes. The raids begin at dawn. In downtown D.C., agents storm the headquarters of 3 more Shell NGOs, seizing encrypted servers, financial records, and over $58 million in cash hidden inside custom-built wall compartments and false ceilings. In Alexandria, Virginia, a fake logistics company is revealed to be a narcotics distribution hub, with agents discovering over 3 tons of cocaine and heroin packaged in modified cargo containers labeled as medical relief supplies. In Baltimore, a luxury hotel suite is raided, uncovering a money laundering operation that processed over $300 million in proceeds from human trafficking and drug sales through fake aid contracts and inflated invoices. In Newark, New Jersey, a shipping warehouse near the port is breached, revealing a hidden compartment system in cargo containers used to smuggle methamphetamine and fentanyl from Mexican cartel suppliers through East African smuggling routes into the domestic supply chain. Near the Maryland border, agents intercept a convoy of modified cargo vans attempting to flee toward Philadelphia, finding 1,800 kilograms of narcotics and 31 undocumented individuals being smuggled as part of a human trafficking operation disguised as refugee transport. In New York City, a network of residential properties is raided simultaneously, with agents rescuing over 67 victims of labor trafficking and sexual exploitation, many of whom had been held for months under threat of deportation and violence. The scale is overwhelming. By mid-morning, federal agents have seized over 8 tons of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl. They have confiscated over $940 million in cash, real estate, financial instruments, and frozen offshore assets. They have arrested 114 individuals, including syndicate operatives, corrupt officials, compromised aid workers, and fake NGO directors. And they have shut down a criminal empire that was generating an estimated $1.3 billion per year in illicit revenue. One federal agent, exhausted and covered in dust after breaching a fortified warehouse, radios back to command. The underworld just took more damage in 7 hours than it has in the last 7 years. 9:45 a.m., FBI Forensic Analysis Division, Washington Field Office. Investigators are sifting through seized servers, financial records, internal communications, encrypted messaging logs, and diplomatic correspondence. What they uncover is a betrayal so deep, it shakes the foundation of trust in the institutions designed to protect vulnerable populations. 34 individuals working in government, NGOs, and international organizations were on the syndicate payroll. U.S. Customs officers received monthly payments in cryptocurrency to delay inspections during specific time windows when narcotics shipments arrived at East Coast ports. State Department contractors provided visa application data and refugee resettlement schedules directly to the Supreme Liaisons network. UN logistics coordinators leaked shipping manifests and cargo inspection schedules, allowing the syndicate to time drug shipments with legitimate humanitarian convoys. And a senior program officer at a major international aid organization falsified project reports to justify millions of dollars in fraudulent grant funding that was funneled directly into the Somali global syndicate's offshore accounts. Federal agents reviewing the evidence describe a system that was not infiltrated by accident. It was methodically corrupted. One honest aid worker, a program coordinator who had worked refugee resettlement for 11 years, sits in an interview room, her face a mixture of anger and grief. We were supposed to be saving lives, and the whole time they were using our work as cover to destroy them. The federal response is swift and unforgiving. Corrupt officials are arrested in coordinated sweeps, many of them taken into custody at their own offices in front of their colleagues. Internal investigations are launched in every compromised agency and organization, and federal prosecutors begin building cases that will send dozens of former government contractors, aid workers, and NGO directors to prison for decades. Deputy Director Holloway addresses the media in a terse statement. What we discovered was not a few bad actors. It was a parallel system operating inside our humanitarian infrastructure. We are tearing it down, and we will rebuild with accountability at every level. 12:30 p.m. National Security Council briefing, the White House. Senior officials from the FBI, ICE, DEA, DHS, State Department, and the Department of Justice gather in the Situation Room to review the full scope of Operation Sanctuary Shield. Analysts present a global-scale map showing how the network extended far beyond the East Coast. Narcotics were sourced from Mexican cartel superlabs in Sinaloa and Jalisco, then transporting through Central America and smuggled into East African ports using fake humanitarian shipping routes. From there, the Supreme Liaisons Network used a combination of diplomatic cargo, UN-contracted freight, and fake NGO shipments to move drugs into Europe, the Middle East, and finally into the United States through ports in Baltimore, Newark, and Norfolk. Cocaine and heroin were smuggled through the same routes, using corrupted aid organizations and modified shipping containers to avoid detection. Fentanyl and methamphetamine were imported through separate channels, exploiting refugee resettlement programs and humanitarian visa pathways to move operatives and contraband across borders. Human trafficking and migrant smuggling operations used the same infrastructure, moving vulnerable individuals from war-torn regions in Somalia, Syria, and Central America through established syndicate corridors, exploiting the desperation of refugees and asylum seekers. The network could move an estimated 2 tons of narcotics per week without triggering law enforcement alerts. Shipping manifests were altered by corrupted port officials and UN logistics staff. Customs inspections were timed to coincide with shift changes and weekend staffing gaps. Diplomatic cargo was flagged as exempt from standard inspection protocols. And at every level, the Supreme Liaison's encrypted authorization codes confirmed his direct command over the operation. But it's the final document that freezes the room. A strategic plan titled Phase 5, Permanent Integration. The plan outlined a long-term vision to transform the entire East Coast humanitarian corridor into a permanent infrastructure for transnational crime, leveraging diplomatic immunity as shield, corrupting aid systems through strategic placement of operatives, and building a shadow governance structure that could operate indefinitely without detection across multiple countries and continents. One official speaks quietly into the silence. He wasn't just running a smuggling network. He was building a criminal state disguised as a charity. This is the story we need to see. Not because it's comfortable, because it's real. Power doesn't always announce itself with violence or intimidation. Sometimes it wears a suit and a UN badge. Sometimes it speaks at humanitarian conferences. Sometimes it writes grant proposals for children's education while simultaneously poisoning those same children's communities with fentanyl. The Supreme Liaison built his empire not by declaring war on the system, but by becoming indispensable to it. He registered NGOs. He secured government contracts. He attended diplomatic receptions. He gave speeches about compassion and human rights. And behind that carefully constructed facade, he commanded a transnational crime empire that destroyed thousands of lives, enslaved hundreds, and corrupted every institution it touched. The cost is measured in lives lost to cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl. It's measured in refugees who escaped war only to be enslaved by the people who promised them safety. It's measured in aid workers who dedicated their lives to service, only to discover their organizations were being used as weapons. And it's measured in the erosion of trust that happens when the systems designed to protect the most vulnerable are weaponized to exploit them. This story is a warning about transnational crime, about corruption, about the weaponization of humanitarian systems for profit and power. If you're still watching, tap like so more people see this story. Comment expose if you want this corruption dragged into the light. Share this with someone who still believes the system is too strong to be compromised. Because the truth is, the system is only as strong as the people defending it. And when those people are bought, when they are corrupted, when they turn humanitarian work into criminal enterprise, the damage reaches far beyond borders. Operation Sanctuary Shield has been dismantled. The Supreme Liaison and his network are facing federal charges that will keep them behind bars for multiple lifetimes. But the battle is far from over. Because for every network exposed, there are others still operating, still exploiting, still corrupting. And the only thing stopping them is whether we choose to demand accountability from every system we trust, inspired by real issues of transnational crime, corruption of humanitarian systems, and exploitation of vulnerable populations, created to raise awareness about threats that hide behind legitimate institutions. But the warning is real, and the responsibility is ours.